Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Laura Kramer. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing you some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage on Monocle Radio, with highlights from our studios here at Midori House and from around the world. Coming up this week,
I think the Oscars still have incredible cultural impact globally. Unlike some award shows in the US, our award show has a global footprint and is becoming more and more global.
It's Oscars Sunday. We'll hear from the man behind the Academy Awards and speak to the directors of one of the nominated documentaries. Then we'll hear about some of the largest opposition demonstrations in Slovakia's history. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes,
Chris Lord, I'm very pleased to say, picked up the trowel and started laying the brickwork for this very fine business section, focusing on what property developers are up to.
We'll flip through the pages of the latest Monocle magazine. We'll also head to Japan for the Stationery Awards, consider the future of the office, and explore the unique challenges of growing a family business. All that and much, much more over the next hour here on The Curator with me, Laura Kramer. Let's kick off the show with a bit of showbiz news because today the 97th Academy Awards will take place at the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles. The Oscars still command sizable interest around the world, and it is undoubtedly the most important of the film awards. Monocle Radio's senior correspondent Fernando Augusto Pacheco spoke with the man behind the show, Bill Kramer, no relation to me if you're wondering. He's the CEO of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He started by describing why the awards telecast still matters.
I think the Oscars still have incredible cultural impact globally. Unlike some award shows in the US, our award show has a global footprint and is becoming more and more global, which I think for your listeners and readers is very interesting. People love the movies, and people may be enjoying movies differently these days. Some people are streaming at home, but the world is making and watching movies more than ever. And we're at the center of that. And the Oscars do this better than any other show or organization. Our Academy does this. We celebrate cinema and bring the world's attention to the work of our cinema artists and professionals across disciplines. So as you said, the lead up to the Oscars and the night of, and even afterwards, I mean, people are still commenting on past Oscars, who they wanted to win versus who won or who didn't get nominated. You know, it really invites the world to have a conversation around cinema. And that's so exciting. And it's still very prevalent.
Yeah, it's so funny how the comments go, because it can be a performance, it can be a dress, it can be anything. It can be even the look of someone when somebody gets an award. It's a really kind of, and how does the digital presence of the Academy is growing? I think you guys are very much connected to the audience. I did notice that, especially in the last year.
Oh, absolutely. And since I've been CEO, it's been about 3 years now. We've made a concerted effort to grow our social presence, our digital presence. And you're really seeing that over the last 18 months. So going back to your comment about the Oscars and the impact of the Oscars, it's about the show. It's about the lead up to the show. It's about who's watching the show, but it's also about who's engaging with our social channels, which, you know, millions and millions of people around the world. I mean, we said this earlier, we have so many Portuguese comments these days because of a current nominee and a current film that's getting a lot of great attention. So the world is communicating with each other through our social media channels, and that's really exciting, and that will only grow.
And I want to ask you about this year's ceremony. And of course, there'll be a lot of amazing stuff and perhaps a few surprises. We can talk about this later. But of course, Los Angeles had a very difficult time this year because of the fires. Was it a challenge? And how are you going to represent that at the ceremony? Or because, you know, a lot of people that work in the industry have been affected as well.
We will definitely recognize the strength and resilience of Los Angeles. Los Angeles has been a home for movie making and creative visionaries for well over a century at this point. And we will have a moment to honor that on the show. It's going to be beautiful.
I want to ask as well, what's your relationship with ABC? Of course, they've been showing the Oscars for years. Is it in a healthy position? So I wanted to know a little bit more, because, of course, it's one of their big kind of events of the year as well.
We have a great relationship with Disney, and that means ABC, and then their international arm, Buena Vista International. The Oscars are shown in more than 200 markets around the world. We have 4 more years left on our contract with ABC, including this show. And we've had an incredible relationship with them that continues. So we're really lucky to have a great partner in Disney and ABC, and now Hulu, which is part of their family. We're streaming live on Hulu in the US and on Disney Plus in some other markets around the world. So our relationship with Disney evolves and is stronger than ever.
Well, that's fantastic. And tell us, what are the surprises for this year's Oscars? I know you probably can't say much, but I mean, the Oscars are approaching its centenary as well. That's impressive. So
that's right.
4 more years or 3 more years for this?
Our 100th show will take place in 2028. Can you believe it?
Wow.
It's really exciting. So that's 27 is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. 28 is our 100th Oscars. So we have a couple of big years in front of us and surprises on the show. I'm not going to give away anything that hasn't already been announced, but as you saw earlier today, we announced a slate of performers: Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande, Doja Cat, Lisa Ray, Queen Latifah. We have some amazing performances lined up. Again, Conan hosting is going to be brilliantly funny and will really bring the world together around cinema. We have great presenters lined up. We've had many announcements about that over the last couple of weeks. So you're going to see some incredible film stars on that stage. And it's going to be a beautiful evening of celebrating the collaborative nature of movie making. That's who we are and that's what we do. And only the Oscars can deliver this.
And it's off to Slovakia now. There has been no shortage of controversy since Robert Fico was re-elected as prime minister in 2023. Much like Viktor Orban in neighboring Hungary, he has been accused of dismantling the country's democratic institutions and steering Slovakia away from the EU and closer to Russia. His distrust of liberal opposition, NGOs, and independent media has only deepened following an unsuccessful assassination attempt last summer. But discontent with his growing government is mounting. Over the past 2 months, Slovaks have staged some of the largest opposition demonstrations in the country's history. Monocle's Alexei Korlyov reports from the capital, Bratislava.
Robert Fico's return to the premiership was always going to be divisive. Some of his government's early moves, the dismantling of a special prosecutor's office that targeted high-level corruption, the restructuring of the public broadcaster, the increasingly nationalist tone, had already sparked concern and protest. But it was Fico's latest actions that, for many, were a step too far.
Prime Minister Robert Fico visited the mass murderer Vladimir Putin in Moscow without any authorization and without any apparent reason a few days before Christmas. He crossed the red line with this visit. It's not normal. We need to do something. And we call for the small protest in front of the government building.
Lucja Staselová is a former deputy mayor of Bratislava who now runs Peace for Ukraine, an NGO supporting Ukrainian refugees in Slovakia.
After that, we decided that we have to organize a real protest, big protest against the entire government, which is turning the direction of Slovakia away from the European community towards Russia. And we feel that it is on the air that people are not satisfied and they are really, really very angry.
Dosiahla minimálna mzda 920 eur.
Both in Parliament and in his frequent video messages on social media, Fico insists that the protests are part of a coup, a sinister foreign-funded plot to overthrow him.
The protests are very, very peaceful in Slovakia. You can see these instances like there is electricity outage in the protests and people just calmly turn on their mobile phones and start singing the anthem. But he's trying to create an impression that this is some kind of coup d'etat or something, which is clearly not the case, and the parallels he's trying to draw are false, but amplified by social media. It's not so surprising that some people, fall into those narratives.
A fresh round of rallies has been announced for this Friday. As with the previous ones, they will take place in cities across the country, not just in liberal Bratislava. So what do people in Slovakia's heartland make of the Prime Minister and his embrace of Moscow? Professor Martin Kahanec is a political scientist and expert in economics at Central European University in Vienna. He held an advisory role in a previous Slovak government, and earlier this month he set off on a research trip.
I'm traveling around Slovakia a little bit now, and you can feel this from the people that these topics are very much alive. You go to a protest and then you go to the National Theatre. There is an actor who comes on the stage with the flag, and the whole audience bursts in applause. Yes? You can also sense it in rural areas. You go into the local pub and you can feel the change in the mood.
Now, as you see the reaction and how fast other cities are joining our activities, the situation and the feeling among the people is much more stronger than we saw.
Back to protest organizer Lucia Staselova for some final thoughts. Robert Fico has already been forced to step down once before, in 2018, following Slovakia's first murder of a journalist. What could this latest, and by far strongest, wave of public discontent lead to?
People are angry and they saw what is Fico doing, and this is really terrible. Every day he come out with some kind of lie, new lies. Now people are laughing and they don't believe him. So people feel that enough is enough and they don't feel so alone. Now, really, this feeling, it is not rational, it is emotional. People are glad that we are organizing, that they thank us. I'm not sure if we change immediately something, but at least the feeling in the society has changed.
For Monocle in Bratislava, I'm Alexei Korolev.
You're listening to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Laura Kramer. Now for a bit of in-house news, the March issue of Monocle magazine is on newsstands now, and it's a special about urbanism and design that includes our very own property survey for 2025. Chris Chermak spoke with our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, and executive editor, Chris Lord. Chris Chermak kicked things off.
Andrew, I'll start with you because this magazine has an urbanism-y, design-y feel to it, which is right up your alley.
God, you got lots of references in there, didn't you? So let's head up my alley, as it were. So yes, up my alley is the world of urbanism, because I like how cities are made. I run the Urbanist show, and we'll be going to MIPIM in a couple of weeks' time, which is the big trade fair in Cannes, which is all about property developers, buildings, how cities are developing, how countries are developing by using their built environment. And it's a really important trade fair. And now, the last couple of years before that, we've run this property special looking at why developers matter, how they're shaping our cities. And this year, Chris Lord, I'm very pleased to say, picked up the baton, or picked up the trowel and started laying the brickwork for this very fine business section, focusing on what property developers are up to. And what are they up to, Chris?
Well, I don't know. I didn't take a T-square with me, Andrew, so it's a bit. some of the walls are a bit askew, but it does come together in the end, and you can get through the door. But look, I think the main thing that I think comes together with this, and was sort of a guiding light of putting it together, was that I think more and more the most interesting property developers out there are thinking more and more about the building that they're essentially developing, that they're funding, that they're working with architects to build, does not exist in isolation, that it has to be mindful of the neighbourhood around it. And what kicks off, and when I say mindful, I mean in the sense of an engine of street life, of commerce, of culture of bringing people together into one space, or even simply how their building can give an area, a neighborhood, a new idea about itself, a new identity in a way that feels sensitive to the people that live there and what have you. So I think that sort of guiding light is found across the survey. It kicks off with 10 buildings that our correspondents around the world have found for us. And there really are an amazing selection of buildings. And this section is called The Buildings That Made Their Neighborhood. So this idea that each of these spaces somehow did something or brought something very, very unique to the area around it. And it runs a gamut from a sort of community pool in New Westminster, which is near the Pacific coast of Canada, right through to probably my favourite building, which in a way is almost like not typical Monocle architecture fare in a way, but it's the Henderson, which is right in the CBD of Hong Kong, one of the last buildings designed by Zaha Hadid. And it's this incredible sort of orchid shape right there in the CBD. As I say, not typical in our world. It's big glass facade outside it. On its exterior, it's got this sort of very natural biological forms that are familiar to anyone who knows Zaha Hadid's work inside it in the lobby and so quite weird looking. Yet there's something sort of very compelling about this shape because it is so unusual. And I think, in a way what the story is about is for some years, like many cities, Hong Kong has struggled with quite high vacancy rates for its offices, which, in the CBD, the beating heart of Asian finance, struggling to get people to come back to the office. And then this mad-looking building that also is so interconnected with all the parks and transit networks that are around Hong Kong has almost acted as this beacon for a kind of new idea of the CBD and trying to bring people back. And, I think it speaks for itself. So much of it was rented out even before it was finished. So it runs the gamut from places like that, big glass buildings, through to one I just want to just spotlight is Joseph Koh, our writer in Singapore, sent a really nice story about an ancestral home of 4 siblings in Chinatown in Bangkok, an area of very beautiful old buildings from around the 1930s, 1920s. A lot of them were built. And what these siblings did is they restored this building, really a kind of mixed use in the old way, retail on the ground floor, residential upstairs. They gave it a new face, a new life, reinvented it a little bit in terms of updating some of its materials. But in doing so, they first of all brought new businesses to Chinatown that would never have thought to be in that area, in that old neighbourhood. And as a result, what has happened is that they've almost started a chain reaction where more people have been restoring the old shopfront houses, as they're called, in Chinatown. And that's bringing more and more new buildings, new commerce to that area. So it's just thinking about, when we talk about property development, that it's not just about a single edifice. It's like what it does to the area around it.
And Andrew, when we hear there about things like vacancy rates in certain CBDs around the world, this is obviously something of a legacy still of the pandemic. And we've had this discussion before about kind of the ideal neighborhood, how that's changed, moving residential into downtown where businesses used to be, all of that stuff. Do you feel like that discussion is settled at this point?
Well, I think that's the whole nature of property development. It's never really settled. It's always an ongoing a story. At the moment, we're seeing that some of the best, most vibrant CBDs are actually doing quite well. Here in London, we have some of the highest rates ever for commercial property in the City of London, as people try to upgrade the spaces they have, to pull back in staff, to ensure that they have a place that says something about their brand. But in other places, it's weak. And you're certainly seeing, again, here in the City of London, if you'd gone out 20 years ago of an evening, you'd have seen nobody around after about 8 o'clock. So everyone would be on their trains going home or heading into the West End. Now there's actually quite a vibrant club scene, bar scene, as it were, or restaurant scene. And we were there the other night for an event at a place called the Ned, and it was packed, the city. And you realise how these places have had to change to attract people in. So always an ongoing story. And interesting, Chris, just on that, and I'm sure we'll pick this up at MIPIN, lots of people now designing buildings that can be fixed, changed, that adapted more easily, because we can't be in this situation where we build a building that's so fixed that when it comes to a bit of slight change of use, have to knock it down and start again.
And Andrew, just one other aspect as well that I know you highlighted in your opener to this magazine, which is a car-free neighborhood outside of Phoenix, Arizona. That's also a different type of change to a residential neighborhood, particularly for the United States.
Well, I shouldn't really be taking the glory because, again, this is a story that Chris found, but it's a company called Cul-de-sac, and they've come up with a formula for building walkable neighborhoods. This is one that's just outside, it's in Arizona. And what's interesting is, that they found that actually people were quite keen to go there. Our writer is cautious because they do say that there's rumours that some people who live in the walkable neighbourhood do have cars parked elsewhere.
Just outside it.
Well, yeah, and it's a complicated thing, but at least the neighbourhood is walkable and people are walking.
It gives you a different feel.
Yeah, and when you see the pictures, it's compact. It's not vast expanses between buildings. Because the weird thing about the US is oddly, many Americans would like to live like this, but the way that codes are laid down in cities, you have to have X number of parking spots per building. People don't want to be building expensive underground car parks, so they build a big parking lot and then the next apartment building. So you go to actually quite interesting, vibrant cities where it feels like a third of the space is given over to car parks and tarmac. So it's a nudging here about changing building codes, thinking differently.
Chris, coming back on that point, coming back from the US to London, do you agree with that? Do you feel there's a hankering in the US for this kind of thing?
Absolutely. And I think Andrew's point is right. It's so true. And so many cities, downtowns especially, are now going, because they're realising that a lot of their CBDs have become sort of drive-in, drive-out places with vast areas of the city centre given over to surface parking, that it's just so wasteful in terms of density, in terms of all this space that, frankly, could be working harder, making more tax dollars, making more money for the people who own that land, whether that's through residential or commercial or whatever that might be. But what struck me from Tom's report, coming back from cul-de-sac, was it talks about really how there is actually, opinion polls show, Americans want to live in walkable cities, neighbourhoods and so on. Yes, they are right now very attached to their cars, but actually the desire is there, and that's vanishingly small amount of the sort of availability of housing stock that is really built with that in mind. Tom does identify a couple of communities that are popping up around the US, and I should say cul-de-sac are now starting to take their model to other cities. Atlanta, Georgia is another one. But there are other communities that are thinking of ways where the driveway becomes a more of a communal lawns area where you can create community on it and so on, instead of just places to park your car, or space, sort of little neighbourhoods where the sort of the kind of shared area around the back can become space for barbecues and for things like that. And there is the desire amongst Americans for it. And we pitched this survey a little bit at developers. It's also at those people who do build buildings. And so if I was a developer reading that, and many working in America right now in these very fast growing cities with housing crises that need more spaces for people to live, one of the things I would take away from it is there is a hunger to live in a different way. It's pitched by cul-de-sac as European-style living. I don't know if we can really call it that, but it is a different way that is just totally not the way that America's cities has grown since the mid-century.
Nearly 5 years ago, much of the world was going about business as usual, while COVID lockdowns took hold in places like China. The pandemic briefly brought everything to a standstill, but the most lasting changes have no doubt been the way we work. With AI now woven into many aspects of our daily lives, the future of work raises plenty of questions. David Gallulo, the CEO and Chief Creative Officer at Rep Studios, specializes in helping major companies rethink their office spaces for this new era. He spoke to Monocle's Emma Nelson on The Globalist.
I think there is a bit of paralysis that has happened, and even the term "return to office" seems to not be aging well, because we're not going back. What we learned when we were sent home in 2020 about ourselves and our relationship with work needs to be incorporated in new tools in how we engage with the workplace, with each other, with our jobs, and with ourselves.
It doesn't necessarily chime. Not everybody agrees with that, though, doesn't there? There's a very sort of strong sense by very large parts of the world that in order to make an organisation live and breathe and thrive, you all need to be together. But we've seen JP Morgan telling everybody to be back into the office Monday to Friday. Is there more a sense that people are delivering the message that you need to be back in an office incorrectly when actually you could turn it into something rather wonderful?
Yeah, I think frankly, I think the one thing we've learned is blanket statements and one size fits all does not work, which is hard for large organizations because it's not easy to manage a more bespoke approach to the types of employees that you're engaging with, and how they need to be placed from remote to hybrid to in the office. What we have seen, however, is the blanket statements of you must be in the office 5 days a week seemingly are backfiring on folks because people have learned about themselves and what they need out of their relationship with work. And it isn't, every day in the studio and in the office. And frankly, the data that we're seeing is showing that employee engagement is not increased by being in the office, which is hard for me as an office designer to bring up. But we're also seeing a multitude of new ways of thinking about what the office means and being more purpose-built around the way people need to gather. And just instead of just saying everyone needs to be there for no apparent reason.
Tell us a little bit about what you are therefore doing, that these new ways of thinking and new ways of working are making working life work for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing work across the globe. Some interesting things that we're doing. We're doing a project for ServiceNow, which is a cloud-based technology platform, and part of their new offices is really being designed around the idea of a clubhouse. It has self-sustaining multi-use rooms and breakout rooms and associated catering. And it's really, a portion of the office that's almost being treated like a hospitality suite. And the idea is that it's in support of the team. So teams have the autonomy to decide when and how to utilize the spaces and can, commandeer them for a period of time when they feel that them coming together is useful to the process, but then can go back to a hybrid work environment. So instead of just saying, go back to the office of 2019, we're seeing, the office of 2025 and beyond kind of take shape. And we're seeing more and more interest and energy being put into these kind of programs and spaces that support kind of multi-day summits, events, experiential elements where people come together around the meaning and purpose of an organization, and then kind of can go back to individual work where it suits them.
How do you make an office space with things like, I think you described a self-sustaining multi-use room? How do you make a space ripe for creativity and collaboration and work without making it gimmicky?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the systems that support the space. And that is, we basically talk about supporting the workforce, and the workplace follows that. So, not starting with the design of the space, but in fact, designing the way that you need to support an individual to come to work as their best selves, the way you need to support a team. And so, we're an interdisciplinary studio. So we do, environmental design, but we also do strategy and experiential. We do employee brand and kind of engagement strategies, because a lot of what we're doing is designing kind of rituals around how people come together and support systems. So it's not just designing a room with technology in it, but it's designing a room with technology in it that have the adjacent spaces to it. And it also has a support system that can, rearrange as necessary so that the space truly is adaptable to the team needs, that can bring food in, that can support the team in any way they need support.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now Now, earlier we heard from the man behind the Oscars. We turn now to one of this year's nominated documentaries, No Other Land. Directed by Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham and Palestinian activist Basel Adra, No Other Land documents years of struggle from settler violence to displacement under oppressive forces. Monocle's Hassan Anderson spoke with the co-directors of the film and asked Basel about the initial starting point for a sadly familiar story.
I mean, I met like Yuval with like other activists, to be honest. It's not, I don't know, I know for people it's like something special, or they look at it like Israeli-Palestinian working together and became friends. It's something like different, or yeah. But for our community, yeah, for me, I grow up like see all the time activists around and moving. I move with them. So wasn't something unique, to be honest, for me, that it's the first time happening. But, you know, with the time and working together and almost weekly that we work together on the field and we move together and we smoke hookah together. Yeah, and we talk a lot about the politics.
And well, Basel, this film has been in the making since your childhood, as you've sort of been filming things from a young age, but also your parents documented a lot too. And they were activists, which we see in the film. How difficult was it for you and Yuval as well to edit everything down and decide what to put into the film?
Yeah, it was not easy because we have like tens of thousands of footage, not just me, my parents that document here, but many activists, many people around, many friends of mine also filming what's going on and documenting. It's an area, like the other day we talked, me and Yuval about it. It's an area where you find so much footage, like rare something happened that it's not captured in a video or a footage. Like other places in the West Bank, so many things could happen and nobody could film that. But our area, it's the opposite. So yeah, we have like a lot of footage and videos from all the activists that start to film more than 20 years ago until today. Also, we want to choose the footage and the videos that shows the reality in a powerful way, and the strongest footage kind of to attract and to explain to the audience what's happening.
And Yuval, you mentioned that on your first meeting, things got quite scary and there was an incident. How long did it take you to get used to filming on the ground with these incidents where there would be the systematic destruction and attacks from Israeli forces and officials?
Yeah, I'm not sure I ever really got used to it. You know, it's something that you are there and you know, when you're documenting the occupation and what it looks like, you can't really know what will happen, and things can you know, it can be a very normal and calm day, and then, you know, settlers come down from the outpost that is just around the hill and they attack the village. Or, you know, you can wake up in the morning and think that you know, we're going to edit a house demolition, and then bulldozers enter the village and a real house demolition happens. For me, the most frightening aspects were the settler attacks. Honestly, it was scarier than the military. The military is only scary for me when it comes at night, because at night they don't allow you to film and they use much more violence. Like the option that they just shoot you while they're invading the village is very much there, and people got beat up and tortured, and you cannot film. The demolitions that are happening were horrible. Like, they drain you emotionally completely, because the army tries to stop you from documenting, and this is all happening in Masaf Riyata, which is like a very hot mountainous region, and you see people being torn away from their houses just because they are Palestinians, that the military does not give them. This is the policy. They acknowledge that they are on their own lands, that it's private Palestinian land, but they refuse to give them building permits. They decline all of the requests for building permits, therefore making their existence illegal. And this is because, under military law, the Israeli military can decide for people who cannot vote, who cannot influence the law, what is legal and what is illegal. So law is used as a weapon to kick them away from there, as documents show as well. So I think, to know all of this politically and then to watch it unfolding in the most sort of direct way was really, really heartbreaking and horrible. And it's part of what we tried to show in the film. Not to speak about, a lot of people talk about Israel and Palestine in really abstract, or not abstract, but, like in a dry way of like you're reading a human rights report or something. But actually there is a human face to how this looks like, and there are effects that reverberate throughout generations. I mean, we spoke about Basel and his father and his grandfather, all born into this kind of life. And I think our film is an attempt to show the emotional consequences as well.
Yes, and you've mentioned before that the goal was to bring some emotion to the human situation beyond just talking about the politics and what feels like an abstract problem at times to people around the world. And you're both journalists and you felt that articles were only going so far. I think the film gives you a real sense of the emotional experience in a lot of ways. As I mentioned just before we started this interview, it's got so many aspects to it in terms of the way you tell the story. And one of those aspects is humour, that you manage to somehow interweave at times that often seem like the worst. And so I just wanted to ask about those shared moments of humour between you and Basil, Yuval, and ask, if it was important for you to include moments like that and if it was like conscientiously thought out to show that human side.
Look, first of all, I'll be honest, like humor is such a big part of life in Masafer Yatta. Like people are constantly relying, resorting to humor, to I don't know. I mean, maybe it's related to like when life is filled with misery and so absurd, then you use like black humor in a way, to deal with it, or maybe it's just how funny the people are, and really, I mean, humor is very much part of life, and it was important for us. First of all, it was easy to show it because it exists quite a lot. And second of all, yes, I mean, the process of dehumanization is always when you put one label, when you minimize the entire human experience to one thing. And the dehumanization is labeling an entire people or as evil, but also there's a form of dehumanization in just painting a very simplistic, version of a victim that is just passive and the reality is not like that. I mean, people are, despite being victims of brutality and of occupation, they're holding on to life, as Basil says in the film, and funny. And yes, humor is a part of the way me and Basil communicate. And it's like we wanted the film to have that the audience will feel different kinds of emotions, and as they go through what is often very, very violent 95 minutes. But it's not only about the violence. There is much more in our film.
And Basil, throughout the film, we also see the camera as a tool of resistance against the destruction and the violent displacement by Israel. How important was it for you to not just show like the struggle involved in resisting occupation, but also showing the difficulty in actually documenting the struggle?
Very important, to show to the people that we pay price and we put ourselves in not easy situation to go film these things. And the Israelis try to do anything to prevent us from filming. Like look at Gaza today, there is 180 journalists and influencers on social media that are killed because of they using cameras and they're filming the genocide they committed there. I mean, here as well, it's not like there, but they beated me physically. They tried to prevent me, and they invaded my home and they confiscated 5 cameras, and they take many of the activists' cameras in the field. I mean, this is very few footage that we bought in the video in the movie. From footage how the challenges that they are try to put in front of us to prevent us from filming and documenting what they are doing to us. I don't think it's act of resistance using the camera, because I still think but it's kind of very important tool that takes the evidence and shows the evidence of what's going on the ground.
When a family owns a successful restaurant, new generations often feel pressure to carry on the legacy. Beyond deciding whether to take on that responsibility, fresh owners must balance staying true to the past while adapting for the future. Amy Poon's parents opened their Chinese restaurant, Poon's, in London in the 1970s. Though she grew up around it, Amy initially resisted taking the reins. Eventually, she revived the restaurant with a pop-up, turning it into a full brand, now including staple sauces from soy to chili vinegar. Amy recently sat down with Chiara Ramella for the menu to discuss maintaining authenticity while innovating, the unique challenges of growing a family business, and how her travels to Hong Kong and Singapore continue to inspire her.
My parents started the business in London in the early 70s. My father comes from quite a long culinary sort of background. Great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather somewhere in the distant past was a chef to the emperor. Probably had loads of chefs. Anyway, so...
But maybe he was his favourite one.
Maybe. I mean, he didn't have his head cut off. So, quite a romantic story. My father actually came to London in pursuit of my mum. And they started making wind-dried meats, which is like a viande séchée, like salami, in 1970 to an old family recipe. And in 1973, they opened the first Poons restaurant in Lyle Street. And that has always been my favourite, and that's actually where I was born. And I think at the time there wasn't, I think authentic is such an overused word now, but there wasn't really authentic Chinese cooking available in England, partly because of, I think, scarcity of ingredients, possibly also a lack of skilled labour. So my father was quite horrified with this concept of, chop suey, what is that? And so he started this little restaurant with my mother, and I guess it garnered quite a sort of cult following. And then they went on to open Poons Covent Garden in 1976, which became, the iconic restaurant. This is it's hard to kind of put into context now, but Chinese food, I think, at the time suffered from a very sort of bad reputation. People had this idea that, Chinese people eat cats and dogs and snakes, and they're probably incredibly unhygienic. And so my father built this glass kitchen, and he plonked it right in the middle of the restaurant. And this was way before the idea of, open concept kitchens and sort of, gastropubs. So it was quite brave, and I think, set a precedent, and all the tables were around the kitchen. And I think there wasn't anything like it at the time. It wasn't in Covent Garden. It didn't have any gold dragons and sort of, red lacquer. And again, I think it really did capture something of the sort of public imagination and affection. I mean, the great and the good ate there. Frank Sinatra used to get takeout when he stayed at the Savoy. Mick Jagger and Jerry Hall and Barbra Streisand and all the Bonds. My mother, who is terrible with celebrities, doesn't ever know who anybody is, referred to Mick Jagger as, that skinny guy with big lips and his wife with a big head, very tall.
Nothing on the profession.
And so, we had this sort of wall of fame where everybody would sign pictures and send to my mum. And then, restaurants in Switzerland and then the city followed. And as you said earlier, I had no intention ever of going to the restaurant business. I grew up in it, and it's incredibly antisocial. It's quite lonely. It's terrible for family life, so if you have children. So, I thought, no, thank you very much. And the hours are punishing. I mean, I do have days, I think, I wrote a post some time ago when we were at Carousel about, why in God's name does anyone do this? And then I went to 64 Good Street very early on, when it first opened, and had just the most wonderful experience. And I thought, well, this is why. Everything about it was just exemplary. And I thought, there's something quite special about being able to provide joy and pleasure to somebody, even for a couple of hours. I mean, I do keep telling my team that we're not ending the Middle East crisis. We're not ending child trafficking or saving lives or performing heart surgery. But I do think, if you can give somebody pleasure and joy, and all the things that come with the shared meal for a few hours, and that's something quite special.
I did want to ask you, how much of a responsibility did you feel in continuing and to a certain extent kind of living up to the expectation of those who wanted Poons resurrected in its earlier form, and how much did you feel the liberty to take it in the direction that you wanted to take it in?
I think from, a family perspective, there was never any pressure. In fact, my mother was quite anti the idea. I mean, she was the one who kind of held everything together. I mean, she was the brains behind it. She was the business mind behind it. My father was just this kind of creative genius. I guess it was like sort of managing Picasso, right? But on top of that, she had a family to look after and a household to run. And so she was the one who said to me, Amy, are you sure you want to do this? I think you're quite mad. Why don't you just sort of stick at your corporate job and be paid your pension, your holidays and whatnot? So from a family perspective, there was never any pressure. As for sort of, public perceptions, we did have one guest, I remember, at the pop-up in Clerkenwell, who was very disappointed and said, well, this isn't Poons. And I said, well, but I'm also not my father. And it was a question of trying to capture a bit of the essence, I suppose, of what he had tried to achieve with the restaurants in the first place. This kind of authenticity piece. Like I said, I do hate that word. But I didn't feel very bound. I feel that I am incredibly lucky that I was gifted something. I mean, I think, a legacy sounds like a rather grandiose, kind of, heavy word. But I think I was given something of a platform which gave me, quite a head start. I mean, I look at a lot of people trying to establish business, whether it's a restaurant or a sauce business or retail or whatever it is, and they're working just as hard as I am, possibly harder, making wonderful products and, doing great things, and they just don't have the platform that I am lucky enough to have. So from that perspective, I'm just incredibly grateful for this opportunity, I think.
Now, as we do every year, it's time to cover Japan's prestigious Stationery Awards. For its 13th edition, a whopping 1,000 nominated items were judged by 13 stationery professionals. And who better to discuss this and go over the winners than Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor Fiona Wilson. She joined Fernando Gusta-Pacheco on The Stack.
Forget the Oscars and all the acting awards. This is what we're really interested in, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, you've been to Japan. The stationery shops here are just detailed beyond belief. And there's just, people love stationery here. They like the pens, the Post-its, they like the pencil cases. And of course, everyone is glued to their smartphones like they are everywhere else. But when it comes to stationery, they take it very, very seriously. So yes, I think Japan is the perfect place for these Stationery Awards.
And especially for this interview, I'm writing here some notes with my Pilot G-Tech C4, which I think makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about some of the winners. Well, talking about Pilot, if you don't mind that we start there, I think he got one of the awards, the Grand Award, right, with their highlighters.
That's right, not just any award, please. I mean, to give you an idea of how much stationery is pumped out of Japan, this award, it's the 13th year of this award, and they only pick from things that have been released in the previous year. And there were 1,000 nominees. So I think you can see there's plenty of new stationery. So yes, straight to the grand prize. Drum roll, please. And it's a Pilot pen. I mean, Pilot pens are not expensive. They do an expensive range. But the average pen, the best bit about all this stuff is this is really accessible. We're talking about 120 yen. I mean, these things are costing €1, nothing really. And the one that won is this highlighter pen. Now, how exciting can that be? But if you care, it is quite exciting because it's got two ends, super fine highlighting. It doesn't come through the paper. It dries in a second. And it doesn't smudge whatever you're highlighting. And, they said we wanted to help students. And I can see why it won an award. And it's also got this brilliant little thing where, this is very detailed, it's got a sort of stabilizer. So when you swipe across a text with a highlighter, you can go a bit wonky. Not with this one, you won't. It steadies the tip, and it's very neat. So I think all the stationery fans love that one.
That's very helpful. We need a very good stabilizer and neat, as you said. And there's some kind of innovations here and there. One that caught my eye, I think, was Koji Jirushi kind of stamp collection. I mean, that looks amazing. There were a lot of different shapes and kind of ice cubes and, all sorts of things.
Yeah, they often do well in this award. I mean, stamping, printing is quite a big thing here. And one thing that not annoys people, but a little bit of an irritation is they're usually made from wood. So when you put the stamp onto the paper, you can't quite see where the stamp is going. And if you like multiple stamps, which people who care and make their own postcards do, you can't see where you're putting the stamp. So what they thought, let's make the stamp translucent. You can see through, you can see exactly where the stamp is going. So that got, because of course you have to remember there are awards for design, idea, functionality. And yeah, this one was a sort of popular ideas award. So, and I think it is a brilliant idea. And if you go into all the shops that we love, Itoya, this very old stationery company in Ginza, everyone's going there and they want to see what's new. So novelty is a big thing. And I thought that was quite fun as well. But yeah, it got the idea prize.
You mentioned Itoya, which is a dream. But there's so many places to buy stationery in Japan. Tokyo Hands actually is excellent on that. I mean, where do you actually go and buy your stationery, Fiona?
I'm a big Hands fan. As you know, it's very close to the Monocle office here. And you just go in, they've got everything. I mean, I'm not really buying expensive pens. What I love about all these companies in Japan like Pilot is they do a very cheap pen that really works. You don't get blotting. I just need something that I can take notes in while I'm doing an interview. And, they really work on making it, so that you can hold it, that the rubber that they encase it in is easier to grip. I mean, another one that won an award, I need to try this one. It's a Mitsubishi pencil one. And, the whole thing about this award is that it solves problems you never knew you had. And apparently people are complaining about paper slippage with some of these pens, that there's a bit of friction when you write on a bit of paper and it moves. So what Mitsubishi Pencil has done is created this pen that the light touch ink just slides onto the paper and you don't have this problem. So I'm looking for that one, and that will definitely be in hands. And it's very cheap. So it's an easy thing to try. Great souvenir if you're coming to Japan.
And one that is, a tiny bit more expensive that I really want to get is the Bandy pen case. I thought that looks stunning. That looks great. And it looks like it's made with Danning as well. It's really nice.
Yeah, that one intrigued me. So that is actually made of it's leather, but it's recycled leather. It's very, very reasonable price. It's not an expensive product. And when I read about it, I thought, it said it's responding to this sort of premium pen boom, which I have to say I wasn't wholly on top of. But apparently, a lot of schoolboys in Japan like these very expensive pens, and they want somewhere decent to store the pens. But they want to spend the money on the pens, not on the pencil case. So this is a bit of a compromise. And I love that the company who make this are called Luddite, which I think is true. They are Luddites. It's old-fashioned craftsmanship. But, I think the point is that you can have all these things. You can have the pencil case and the pens, and you can have your smartphone and work off a tablet. And I think that's probably the reality for most students who will, incidentally, you have to remember that we're coming to the end of the school year in Japan. So this is all in preparation for the start of the new school year at the beginning of April. So they time it to perfection for those brand new pencil cases on day one.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Laura Kramer. Join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the programs here on Monocle Radio. Thank you for listening.